as you know, the Chinese government has blocked a lot of social media channels, and I thought it was always about kind of the human rights aspect of it. It was terrible that they were doing that. But Andrew taught me something, among many other things. He said, but by blocking all these channels, they were able to build their own multi-billion-dollar corporations. And I'd never thought of it that way. So in a way, they were doing it to be, to block out dissent and everything else. But in return, what did they get? Some of the world's most important, biggest digital companies are in China. And so I thought that's a fascinating thing. And the other part of this also is that the only channel not blocked, major channel not blocked in China is LinkedIn. And what I tell people is the Chinese government appreciates LinkedIn more than you guys, more than us, because they know the value of LinkedIn, and that's why they've not blocked it. And so just keep that in mind, that the Chinese government values LinkedIn more than you do. So get on to LinkedIn and use it properly. Without further ado, Andrew Lih and gang.
We stole our big reveals. I guess we just go home now. But that's a great point. We'll talk about that more. And I think that when we think about censorship in China, everyone sees it, at least from the US, as a free speech, human rights issue. Well, we're going to talk about all the other implications and why we're going to show you this gigantic wheel of .com companies that are enabled by the fact that the Chinese government said, don't go visit those sites out there, visit the sites that are originated in China, and wow, what an interesting landscape that has been. So we're going to talk about not just the social media business side, but just kind of the societal impact of having the internet in China. So although this is labeled social in China, we're going to spend a chunk of time just introducing you to the just basic internet landscape in China, since most folks don't know that much about it. So let me just first introduce our panelists very quickly, and they can go into more detail about what they do. We have Jason Eng over here. He's actually one of the experts in the world. We're really lucky to have him about censorship in China and how sites and companies have reacted to that. We also have, he's an NYC-based researcher for the University of Toronto Citizen Lab, which specializes in looking into these issues of censorship and societal impacts. Jeremy Goldkorn right here got probably the most eclectic background you can think of. South African who spent a lot of time in Beijing creating a site called Danwei.org, and now lives in Nashville, Tennessee, here in New York City now. So what an interesting journey it's been to be here with us. He's the founder of one of the most influential sites on the internet in English language, looking at Chinese pop culture and internet culture. It was called Danwei.org. It translated a lot of things that happened in the Chinese media and Chinese pop culture into language that was accessible by English speakers. But he has firsthand experience of being blocked in China. And after that site was blocked, he sold his company to FT, Financial Times, where he continues today as the director of Danwei and custom research for FT. So really happy to have these folks up here. So let me just get up here. Can we switch off to the slides? Because we actually have some slides up here that we can go through very quickly. There we go, great. So we're going to do this very quickly in 10-minute chunks, and then we'll leave a bunch of time for your questions and our discussion here. We really don't want to take up too much with our words here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the China digital landscape and trends that are happening, and then get into the meat of social media in China, which is really fascinating. And in many ways, the US is, I don't want to say catching up to China, but looking a lot more like China in terms of the diversity of social media platforms that are out there. And then we're going to talk about the societal impacts of what has social and mobile internet meant for life in China, and in what ways has it influenced politics in China as well. All right, so this is a great way to start off looking at the Chinese language internet. China's online users more than double entire US population. That's mind-boggling, right? We can't even grasp what that means. But inside those 600 million folks are a lot of interesting stories and different ways that they're using the internet. So here's some basic stats about the internet in China. So that double number is around 649 million users of the internet in China. Curiously though, it's 86% of them are using it from the mobile phone. All right, so going from a country that is developing into this powerhouse, a lot of folks just skipped the laptop and PC revolution and just went straight to mobile. And why not? You've got this great mobile device in your hand that's as powerful as a computer maybe 5 years ago, right? And in fact, that's where we're going as well in the US, of people going online with the mobile and relegating the desktop and laptop to the trash heap. Okay. So again, the phone is increasingly the first and only experience online. Try to grasp this. For the last year, Apple has seen that Q1 is their biggest quarter. Not Q4 for Christmas sales, but Q1. That's when Chinese New Year is. That tells you how important this market is to Apple and all these other consumer electronics firms. So just some hints about how to talk about this intelligently. We have a lot of journalists here. We might have PR folks who are writing press releases or trying to talk about this intelligently. I always like to try to make this point to folks. You'll come out a lot smarter, a lot more intelligent by making these distinctions between China versus Chinese, and hopefully probably excising the phrase the Chinese in almost anything that you write or speak of. Like, it's almost a meaningless thing that you say the Chinese. So if you want to be specific, say either China or users in China or users using the internet in China, or if you're talking about ethnicity, you can talk about Chinese or Chinese language, but the Chinese, almost always a bad idea, especially for journalists to use that term, right? China is a country with 1.3 billion customers, if you're into the business side of things. But outside of China, there's a huge diaspora of not just individuals, but really important cultural contributions from folks in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. So they're not of China, but they are Chinese language, Chinese ethnicity, Chinese culture, right? So think about this, for example. How many Chinese ethnically are outside of China that don't live in China? Does anyone have any guess what that is?
10 million.
10, 20. Well, there are more Chinese people living outside mainland China than French people who live in France. So that's a lot, right? And culturally, they contribute a lot too. So just make those distinctions. China, Chinese, and probably don't use the Chinese. So that's just a kind of a sidebar to make sure you know what you're talking about there. The dominant players in the China's internet landscape, and I'm speaking of China's internet landscape here, are sometimes referred to as the BAT or BATs, right? These are folks you might have heard of before, but might be new to you, right? So Baidu is the big dominant player in this whole thing, right? You want to do a search on the internet in China, Baidu is the dominant one, similar to the type of influence that Google has, right? But there's a lot of other things that Baidu does, same way that Google does other things as well. The most popular encyclopedia in China is on Baidu. It's not Wikipedia. Because it's been blocked, Baidu now has almost all that traffic. The most popular message boards and those types of things used to be on Baidu as well, so they're kind of a big traditional portal in China. The strange thing about China, if you've ever spent time there, is that they didn't really use credit cards for a long time, right? So people needed a way to pay for things. So there were the .com companies that came in to fill that void as well. So Alipay, WeBank are people who filled in that space. So the A in the BAT is Alibaba. It started off mainly as a way for companies like B2B or B2C type of transactions, but Alibaba, which was invested in by Yahoo, has now become a household name in China, and Alipay and a lot of these services that are used for online payment are run by Alibaba in China. The T in China is generally recognized as Tencent, right? So Tencent had a very popular chat app. Think of it as kind of like AOL Messenger plus Skype, and the dominant chat client in China, but it's branched out to much more than that. And Jeremy's going to give us a demo of some of those things and what that looks like as a major social media platform now. And then sometimes we use the S as well for Sina Weibo. So some folks might have heard of this term Weibo, which means microblog in China. Sina used to have the most influential microblog out there, but that's changed in recent years. So you might hear about the BATS, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Sina as kind of the big .com companies in China. But what's fascinating is this always in flux. As the social media revolution has hit China, a lot of these things have been disrupted in that way. Okay. And oh, sorry, I didn't talk about Taobao. So e-commerce, there's also another company named Taobao that is very popular for consumers to buy goods online. So talk a little about the mobile landscape. Since we're saying that 80+% of the folks are getting online through mobile, you might be surprised to hear that there's really good 4G coverage in China right now. Because they originate so much of electronics manufacturing and they're trying to be a global player by shipping their telecom equipment to Africa and developing countries. They've got really good telecom infrastructure and a really good nationwide network among the three main carriers there. So there's really three main carriers: China Telecom, China Mobile, and China Unicom. The government makes sure that these are the three big players, but in exchange for that dominance, the users get a really good, well-connected mobile infrastructure. I can't tell you how many times students from China come here to the US to go to college, and they cannot believe how crappy our coverage is here in the US. It just happens all the time. It's gotten a lot better in the US, but it's really not as good as China in general in the major areas. Android is the dominant platform that you see in China as well. But curiously enough, because Google is blocked in China, the Google Play Store is not really prevalent on people's mobile devices. So there are lots of different app stores that are out there because Android is so open to plugging into different app stores. But what really is important is what ships with your phone, right? What the carrier ships or what the manufacturer ships on the phone makes a big difference. So, that's what you've seen with Apple phones. What is the default app makes a big difference in terms of what people use on their phones. iPhone is also getting really popular, especially for the elites and middle class. It's seen as a status symbol. Apple's opening so many stores in China. They pretty much lead off all their keynote talks at Apple Talks with what they're doing in China these days. Another interesting thing is if you've heard of a company called Xiaomi. How many people have heard of Xiaomi before? Oh, that's actually more than I thought, which is good. This is a homegrown brand that is actually growing really fast as a domestic electronics or consumer electronics brand, and they're really pumping out a lot of high-end but inexpensive smartphones and other consumer electronics in China. So as Sri said, block sites. You can debate what is the primary motivation for it, but a big residual benefit is that it's been a commercial and economic boom for China, right? Not only does it keep speech that the government doesn't want to proliferate from going around, but it also provides landscape for domestic .com companies to have a ready and willing audience of folks using their services, right? So if you block Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, that's a lot of stuff. And in comes a video portal site, in comes a search site, in comes a social networking site. In the early days, a lot of these mimicked what you saw in the West in terms of look and feel of Facebook or the look and feel of Flickr or YouTube. But in the 10+ years that social media has been on the landscape, they've come up with their own flavors and their own versions of this, and we'll see that with some of the demos later on. The blocking in using the Great Firewall, you might see the GFW, meaning the Great Firewall. Jason will talk about later in terms of how it's done and what does it mean for content online. So just one final warning. When we talk about social media in China, try to avoid these types of things, like saying, oh, Sina Weibo, it is China's Twitter, or it is the Facebook of China. It not only doesn't make a lot of sense logically, but it's just inaccurate. Right? So these are social media products in their own right. They've evolved their own way. When you see WeChat that Jeremy looks at, you're like, this looks like nothing we can get in the West. So really avoid these terms of saying, this is the exact analog of that in China, because they're not. Right? So you might want to say something like this. There's an online site called Meilishuo, a fashion site with Pinterest-like features. That's a better way to describe these things. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy, and he can talk a little bit about the landscape of social media in China and show us a little bit about how it looks on a mobile phone. And I think you can plug it in here right off of this.
Right, OK. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks. A few years ago, Chinese social media did look a lot more like American social media. Facebook was cloned almost exactly by a site called Kaixinwang. It looked the same as Facebook, the same design, same colors, and the functionality was pretty much the same. Sina Weibo, which Andrew had mentioned, which is often glossed in the media as the Twitter of China, started out basically as the Twitter of China. It looked like Twitter. But a long time before Twitter allowed you to upload photos, share videos, Weibo did that, and they also enabled threaded comments, which in a way that Twitter still doesn't enable. Basically, a Weibo post, you can click on it, and then underneath it you can leave comments, and it displays kind of like an old-fashioned blog post, keeping all the comments together. And they've also enabled a lot more different kinds of functions. But this is changing very fast. I mean, the height of Weibo was 2012. It was the most active social media platform in China. It was a source of a lot of discomfort for the government. There was a lot of controversial political discussion. And the government began to clamp down on it, on political discussion, by means of arresting some prominent users, putting more pressure on Sina, the company, to self-censor. But at the same time, and some would say a more important factor in the decline, relative decline, because it's still popular, of Weibo, was the rise of WeChat. So WeChat came from Tencent, one of the bad companies that Andrew mentioned. And they'd started with this, it was called QQ, like ICQ. It was a clone of ICQ, again. And it was the most popular messaging tool in China. And that was generally the way you chatted with other people in China. But they launched WeChat about just over 3 years ago. And it very quickly became the most popular communication tool in China. Everybody's on it, from peasant farmers to housewives to students. And it's really eclipsed all of the other social media in terms of influence. The list on the screen right now, you can see number 2 is Sina Weibo, and that's still very important. It's still a place where people discuss things. It's still a place where things can go viral, because as I'll show in a little bit, it's difficult for things to go viral on WeChat, which the government likes, another benefit. There are other sites, Qzone, RenRen, and there's a lot of still quite popular verticals, as they call them, niche or topic-specific websites like Auto Home, which you can understand what it is. It's about autos. Daima, which is for mothers, sort of parenting. Sorry, Lama Bang for parenting. Daima is a kind of women's interest site. This wheel that you can see here, if you want to see the whole thing, the link is over there. It's on AdAge. It's from AdAge. This is made by an agency in Beijing that works in social media, not me. This is basically the range of platforms. So you can see fashion, all these names, parenting, health, finance, education, high tech. These are all these verticals that I was talking about. And a number of video sites. They're still sort of old-fashioned BBS, bulletin board style forums. It's really, truly diverse. So now I'm going to plug my phone in and try and just give you an idea about why WeChat is such a big deal. If I can find, which one is it?
It's the one in front, I think.
I lost the...
Okay.
This one?
Ah, there we go. Yeah, okay. Okay, so there's my phone. So WeChat. There's an English version, so you can download it if you can't read Chinese. So the first thing is a message from my wife. So you might recognize this image as a sort of WeChat style, WhatsApp style interface, but it's much more complicated. Here are animated GIFs, which you can make yourself. So here's one of President Xi Jinping, people dancing, animations. These are very popular. The other functionality is pretty much like you would see in WhatsApp. You can have group chats, you can one-to-one, but you can also do a voice call, and you can do video. And the quality is better than FaceTime, or more reliable, I would say, than Apple's FaceTime. It's really very good. But OK, you've got an iPhone or a good Android, you've got WhatsApp, you've got all that functionality. Contacts, nothing new. You have the ability to have a public account. So here is, as a good follower of Chinese Matters, for example, I'm following the account of Communist Party members. So this is basically where newspapers, publications, companies can have a public account where they make postings that are kind of, I suppose, the equivalent of a blog. And you have to subscribe. And this is the one completely public-facing side of WeChat that is sort of like blogging. Still not that impressive, really. But let's go on to Discover. So here we have Moments. So this is basically like a Facebook feed. Very easy to share videos. Comment. You can comment on it. So I can comment on it. And the interesting thing is that only people who follow both me and this person who's my wife with our kid swinging in the playground. Only people who follow us both will see the comment. You can scan a QR code. So, you know, if somebody's using a QR code for a URL or something, you can scan it. You can shake. So if I'm in a bar and I think maybe there's somebody around me that I would like to get in touch with, I can shake, or I can just do it randomly and see if anybody else is shaking their phone nearby, and it'll connect us. Ah, there, somebody who is very far away, perhaps in the Middle East. Okay, so I can then communicate with them. Another function of interest is the people nearby. So now it's looking for people with WeChat nearby. And it's always an interesting exercise outside of China to see who's using it, because you can see the density of Chinese populations outside of China by how many people there are. So these are all people nearby, and I can message them if I want to get in touch. You can also select by male or female. So this will give me only the males or only the females, which you can see might have a certain use for some people. OK, I'm not going to wait for it to load. You get the idea. There's funny little games like this drift bottle. I can pick up a drift bottle. So this is somebody's left a message in a bottle. I pick it up, and OK, this person says they have insomnia. So I could message them and say, you know, me too. I'll throw it back. So there are games. You can download a bunch of free and some paid games. So, I mean, people call this sometimes the WhatsApp of China, but you should be having an idea now of how much more it is than WhatsApp. It's even more than that. Here's my profile. I can show somebody my QR code to connect instead of you know, doing it by typing in their username. My posts is where I'd put to my Facebook kind of feed. Favorites. Here's one of my favorite functions is wallet. So there's a full suite of financial and kind of lifestyle services. I can quick pay. So somebody wants to pay me. I put this QR code up. They scan it. They can transfer money. How do they transfer money? Like this. So OK, there's my wife. I'll transfer to her. I'll give her 1 renminbi transfer. OK. Let's see. Done. OK. Now, this is a country where very few people have credit cards. Bank cards are pretty common, but relatively new. Nobody really has a personal checkbook. And so this is really kind of revolutionary. Also in the wallet, mobile top-up, so I can pay my mobile phone. Wealth, that's a wealth management product. It's basically a fund that you can put money into, and it gives better interest than the bank. Order taxi, that basically works with Didi Dache, which is a kind of Uber of China that uses the existing taxi network that Tencent is an investor in. Specials, I can buy you know, stuff on sale that they market to me. Group buy, it's kind of like a Groupon thing. Lucky money, I can send somebody the traditional Chinese festival greeting of a red envelope full of money, except this one's virtual. Movie tickets, air tickets, Go Dutch enables you and your friends to sort out a bill very easily and then pay each other with the phone. So that is all in this one app. And this app is, you know, depending on who you believe, got anything from 300 million to 600 million users, or at least accounts in China. And it really is the thing you need to know about if you want to understand Chinese media, Chinese social media. I'll go back to the computer now, and I'll try not to take up too much time. Oh, actually, that is the end of my section. So I'll hand over to Jason.
Sure. Yep, sure.
Great.
So Andrew and Jeremy have clearly outlined the amazing development and the complexity and the array of products available in China. But among the things that I'm sure many of you are wondering, what do actually people share? What sort of content is found in social media in China? And so obviously, just like here in the West, there is a range of different kinds of content available and being liked and circulated online in China, Chinese social media. So you have more frivolous, fun, silly content like images of people sharing pictures of their pets with stuffed animals. You have, just like here in the West, what we think of as the main driver for many of the advancements in internet technology, the desire to more efficiently get pretty pictures of pretty girls. You also have that in China. And this is actually, Jeremy was explaining to me, this is actually a meme that's being circulated in China right now. Apparently, girls are posting pictures of themselves to show off how thin they are. Their ability to be able to wrap around your waist and touch your belly button, that's a sign of your thinness, and so that's I guess the belly button challenge.
Taking on over here.
Oh, has it? Yeah. All right. Yeah, so there you see the globalization of media and content around the world, and misogyny, perhaps. So yeah, so there's this sort of frivolous, fun, silly content, but just like here in the West, we have more serious material being shared online in China. So we have an image of what is circulated by watchdog bloggers who are tracking government officials who are wearing Rolex watches, who are ostensibly receiving meager government salaries, tackling corruption. We have hard-hitting documentaries shared on Tudou and Youku, which documents the environmental devastation being wrought throughout China, which happens. And then we also have images of protests and that sort of thing. So there is more what we consider sensitive content being shared online in China. But what is actually sensitive? What is considered sensitive? And I think, as many people have uncovered, it can be quite loose in social media. What is worthy of being censored? What is worthy of being restricted and filtered? And that's partly by design. The government has made, although they do issue directives which outline specific, itemized lists of things that are being targeted for censorship, they oftentimes leave it fairly open and loose and up to the companies themselves to figure out what are the lines of worthy of being censored. But we have, researchers and those looking and examining these sorts of directives by Chinese officials have uncovered some basic buckets of what is considered sensitive in China, which includes very much protests, any sort of collective action, both online, whether it's campaigning on behalf of a cause or redressing a grievance, or offline, be it gathering people and organizing people on the streets. These are very clearly marked as sensitive and worthy of being censored across all social media platforms. Other things include criticism of censorship, criticism of the government, criticism of CCP, state media, and so on and so forth. Political commentary, that's suddenly now become more and more a hot button issue of being worthy of censorship. Whereas in the past on Weibo, in the past you might have had really interesting, fascinating conversations about politics. In the past year or so, we've started to see more of a crackdown on even speculation, even commentary about politics. And clearly this is an effort to try and control the message, try and control the ability of people to reach out in a more unfettered way that's not managed by the government. And then again, we also have rumors, misinformation, and pornography. These are more prurient interests, more things that are targeted because of the belief that they are spiritually polluting the society, or the belief that these are not necessary for creating a clean, useful, positive online environment for not only children, but for citizens in general. However, just to hammer home the point, there is a vast array of material online on China. Just like here in the West, you have lots of mindless drivel, but in the flip side, you also have very much political commentary and stuff like that. But it's not one or the other. The internet in China isn't purely trash, and it's not purely ablaze with revolution. There is a balance that reflects the array of many different voices that occur amongst 600 million online users. So with that said, does the government recognize that social media is a potential problem? Yes, clearly they do. But they also recognize that there's many great advantages to be drawn from social media and internet. The ability to use it as this way of gauging the public interest and public opinion, to more accurately respond to local issues, to be able to fire local officials if need be, and stuff like that. And this clearly, this quote from an official state party journal reflects this sort of belief that social media is something that government, local officials, people in China, authorities need to be aware of, and they need to be engaged in order to make full use of this technology. But obviously, to mitigate the potential risks, they've developed different ways of managing the potential destabilizing aspects of social media. So you might not know this because based on what we think about censorship in China, we think of, oh, there's this monolithic entity that creates this great firewall which stops certain content from being accessible from within China. And to an extent, the government has led the charge in creating certain kinds of barriers to finding and accessing information. But in actuality, most of the censorship that most people would encounter in social media is being done by the companies themselves. Governments have issued broad directives, but it's up to the companies to figure out where's the line of what is sensitive and what isn't. And because it's not necessarily clearly drawn, they don't receive like a weekly document every week saying, these are the 5 things that you can't allow, there may be a certain over-censorship and a potential chilling effect. The same sort of thing happens for internet users themselves in China. Because oftentimes there's been a push to create real name registration, internet users have to either tie their mobile phone to their accounts, or even in more strict cases where they actually have to take photos of their national ID card in order to register their account. They are responsible for the content that's being shared on their social media profile, and thus that also can potentially create a chilling effect where people are afraid of sharing potentially borderline content, which may get them, not just get your account suspended, which is pretty bad. If you have hundreds of thousands of posts and millions of fans, one of the worst things to happen to your brand would be to have it suddenly suspended and removed. But further from that, you could also get punished, you could get fined, you could even get detained. These are real potential repercussions. But if we read Western media, we may think that happens all the time. It's not necessarily the dominant response that takes place. It's not everyone who's posting a sensitive message is being hauled into jail. But there are enough people being detained to scare people from even necessarily stepping close to the line. And then very quickly, the 50 Cent Party is this supposed, or not supposed, but it's an actual groups based in local bodies throughout China, or based in different departments within the state agencies, which encourage people to post positive messages online to support Chinese policies or to criticize anti-Chinese policies. While some of this is directly encouraged by state officials, a lot of it is very much driven by individuals who honestly believe and support Chinese policies. And so there's there's a credibility gap online where you're not sure if someone's posting something because they genuinely believe it or because they're paid for it. So there is confusion sometimes with regards to stances online, political stances online. And so obviously foreign media and companies need to account for these restrictions and regulations, but sometimes it's just the repercussions sometimes are arbitrary. You could look at, say, for instance, what happened to Reuters and how their website was blocked, and for no apparent reason per se, or other instances. And basically, the thing is you need to think about potential repercussions in advance. Otherwise, you might suffer this sort of PR snafus like LinkedIn might have faced recently over their censorship of potential June 4th and other anti-Chinese dissent that they were found to be removing. And their explanations may not have been the most crystal clear at the time, and I'm sure they've developed more detailed policies since then. So like I said, with regards to in the US, there is a range of material, but for the most part, I think if we want to generalize, although it's very difficult to generalize about Chinese internet, a lot of this discussion revolves around more prosaic matters like what I had for breakfast, what movie star is dating whom, and so on and so forth. And that's generally what people are interested in. And the fact that we think that there's a lot more dissent going on in China is due in part to Western media. But it's also maybe due to the fact that we don't really recognize that a lot of people in China actually do support the national government, like I mentioned. But that doesn't mean that social media and internet isn't having a drastic change on society. Thinkers and scholars like Guo and Yang have written about the fact that even non-political activity online does have political overtones, like online gaming, message boards for mothers. These sorts of things can lead to discussions that can eventually lead to political engagement and that sort of thing. And not even if it doesn't necessarily lead to democracy in China, there is an engagement that didn't necessarily exist pre-social media. Tricia Wong has also done extensive research into this. I highly recommend you look at, if not her entire thesis, then do look into her discussion of this sort of elastic self and the engagement ladder and how social media is giving people a voice, an opportunity to converse, sort of akin to what Clay Shirky has talked about. And An Xiaomin is another scholar who's looked at specifically memes and humor, which I'll touch on very briefly in this last section. So viral. So what goes viral in China? Obviously humor and other funny things very easily go viral. Some of it is very much apolitical, like for instance the belly button challenge, even though it is potentially ripe for claims of misogyny or whatever and other sort of political overtones. For the most part, it's just a fun thing that people do. Sometimes memes and humor can be quasi-political, like for instance this grass mud horse, which has become a symbol for anti-censorship efforts because basically because certain websites in China don't allow you to post obscene words. Internet users in China have developed ways to get around them by posting homophones of those same words. And so this grass mud horse, literally the words for it, 草泥马, if you pronounce them a slightly different way, it sounds like fornicate with your mother. So that's a way of basically getting around the censors. But it's also just a fun thing that they do. So it's both criticism of the censorship system, but also a playful way of expressing your dissatisfaction. And one final example, so for instance, in a anti-pollution, or I'm sorry, in 2012 there was an effort to build a chemical factory in Sichuan, and one of the police officers that was cracking down was caught chasing these unarmed protesters. And he essentially was captured doing this, and folks ran with it. They started posting him chasing other folks, like movie stars, athletes, and even art icons. So this is an example of more playful, less directly political statements. This is a way for people to express themselves, but not necessarily do in a way that makes them liable to be hauled into jail. So it allowed users from around the country to express solidarity, but also, in a way, entertain each other. So I'll kick it over to, I guess, the takeaways for journalists, and we'll talk briefly, and then we'll open it up.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'd love to open up as quickly as possible to the audience for Q&A, because we only have about 20 minutes left. So if there are any questions, feel free to tweet as well at me. I'm at Fuzzheado with SMWKND if you want to, or just raise your hand. We can answer any questions that you have. Yes?
In what ways are companies, or maybe even institutions of higher ed, infiltrating social media to reach the consumers and increase their yield and their revenue?
Chinese companies or foreign companies?
I would say I'd start with Chinese companies.
Well, I mean, it's starting with Weibo, which became this nationwide phenomenon in a way that Twitter still really hasn't, say, in the US. I think universities were probably one of the first types of organizations to figure out that they could use it effectively. I don't think there's any particular trick that they're doing that isn't being done in the US. I mean, they're tweeting interesting stuff. Some are successful and some aren't. It's very difficult to tweet serious stuff that isn't controversial or funny or pornographic and have it go viral. And the same things apply in China. One thing I would say is that there's celebrities, and there are a lot of celebrities in China who are business people, entrepreneurs, academics, are probably the most effective ways Chinese companies and universities can get kind of leverage in WeChat and Weibo. Have anything to add to that?
There's a question back there. Yeah.
It was similar to that, which was, there wasn't much reference to commercial use of these platforms, not by the companies that have developed them, but by other companies, and because there's so much obsession and sort of striving to do that, in sort of the West in terms of reaching a new audience or new customers through social media, but you kind of addressed that. The celebrity question is an interesting one, I guess, because especially like with the movie industry is so big in China, so I'd be curious to know a little bit more about how that industry in particular maybe is trying to use this.
I think it's fair to say, I mean, it's a huge part of pop culture, especially for the younger generation. I mean, it's the same type of trends where, especially in China, the television environment's been really kind of stale. They haven't had this kind of renaissance of like HBO, AMC, all this kind of stuff. It's been like CCTV, the state-owned television, and young people are just not watching it. And they were just hopping online. They were completely eating up the online culture. And you're seeing companies address that by going there to reach youth, right? It's not television at all for the youth.
And just very quickly, so they must have a very competitive sort of developer sort of community. I mean, given how advanced some of these, like WeChat is, I mean, what, do you guys know anything about that? I'm curious what the sort of developer and the programmer community is like in China, and how much in demand their services.
I mean, there are two big centers, Shenzhen, where Tencent is based, and Beijing, and then Alibaba is in the city of Hangzhou, which is near Shanghai. And those, I would say, those are the three places with the biggest developer communities. Beijing is the biggest. I mean, China produces a lot of engineers. For every lawyer in the United States, they have like 10 engineers in China, and they're getting good. And the idea that they can't innovate because there's a lot of government censorship, I think you can see from some of these platforms, at least technically, they are innovating. They're making new things. So it's very big. It's very active. Particularly, it feels in the last year and a half with Jack Ma becoming a gazillionaire because of Alibaba going public. There's this frenzy of young people doing startups, which is really new in China, which generally has been quite risk averse. So it's a pretty exciting time for developers. Very grim times for journalists and people who like to think and write about what they think, but really exciting times for startup engineers.
Yeah, I mean, it's before this, it used to be in China, you saw it as the workshop hardware, these type of things, and then if you want to work software, you'd want to go for a Microsoft or an Intel, these foreign companies that were there. And it's just completely changed in the last 10 years, where you're going to go work for a Baidu, a Tencent, these kind of folks, and it's no longer the aspiration is to work for that foreign, prestigious Silicon Valley company anymore. It's its own ecosystem and its own culture, which is pretty amazing to see. Yeah. Let's start from the back and we'll move forward. Yes. Yeah, right there.
What kind of appetite is there for international reporting coming into China?
The appetite doesn't matter because it's censored. So, I mean, the appetite, I think, goes up and down. One of the most popular newspapers in China, with the highest circulation, is called Cancao Xiaoxi, which means reference news, and is translated material from the outside world. So there is a huge appetite. And I would say that even the terrible, horrible, boring, censored CCTV has more international news than any American news station, TV news station. So people like to get international news. But in terms of unfiltered international news that's not censored, everything is censored.
Yeah, I agree. It's completely up to certain segments of the population. So, for instance, within, some of my professors, friends, and folks who live in China, when the New York Times published that expose of Wen Jiabao's family stories, they immediately texted him and said, "Can you send me this? Can you email me the story?" And so, while I do agree that there is a certain appetite and desire to get to the most raw information that is being available out there produced by Western journalists, for the most part, people have written about the political apathy of young people in China. Helen Gao, who's a really interesting, fascinating writer, has written extensively about how her peers, the college graduates in China, while they do have access to tools that allow them to cross the Great Firewall, to reach out to these Western sites unblocked, many of them aren't actually utilizing them. One, because there's a level of technical sophistication that you have to have, but also secondly, because they're just not interested. That's not where their interests lie. And I think while it's hard to generalize, I think there is a kernel of truth in that for many young people, it's, WeChat. perhaps.
And I think that changed. I mean, I moved to China in 1995, and I moved to Nashville 3 months ago. So it was like 20 years. And in 1995, I mean, people were so curious about everything in the outside world. You know, music, sport. How do you do this kind of thing in Danwei? It means outside China, and usually it means America, actually. How, you know, what is the sport like? Bring me tapes of rock music. Whereas a lot of, I mean, I feel since 2008, a lot of younger people are kind of like, yeah, you know, we got our WeChat and our Lamborghinis. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, right here.
In the U.S., the internet, especially in social media, has really had an impact on how Americans see themselves as patients, how they utilize the healthcare system, how they talk to each other about health, what they buy, even apps. Is anything like that going on in China?
Pollution.
Pollution. Yeah, that's a big one.
Pollution has been a big one because you can kind of do it in pure metrics. So one of the big things is comparing what the U.S. Embassy puts out as the pollution count, which is this, and the Chinese government always says, it's right here. And it's just really stark to see that, right? So there's a lot of kind of environmental issues that are probably at the forefront of being discussed in China.
There's also some really interesting stuff like hepatitis B has been, hepatitis sufferers have had a lot of discrimination in China. Like many employers won't employ you if you have it, and there are even universities that don't allow hepatitis sufferers to attend class. And this started actually in the late 90s with, you know, old-fashioned internet forums where people started to get together and figure out, oh, you know, there are other people like me, and started to figure out what strategies to deal with it and talk about, you know, treatments and ways to deal with the discrimination. You're also seeing kind of review your doctor kind of sites. None of them have really sort of taken off solidly. But I think it's coming. This is one area where the government is kind of sensitive because the healthcare system is as messed up as America's, but in a completely different way, and pretty much worse for the patient. It's a very sensitive issue, and it resolves in very odd ways. There's every few weeks just about you have patients attacking doctors and nurses in hospitals with knives because they're just so frustrated by a system that's messing them around. And so I think the development of this sector online has been a little bit slowed down because the government sees it sensitive. But it's definitely will be a big part, I think, of healthcare in the future.
Yeah, and just to expand on Jeremy's point very quickly, particularly that hepatitis case, it was an example of social media, or the internet, since it was pretty much pre-social media, example of the internet allowing people to find like-minded individuals, to be able to basically what Emily Parker says, you know, find out who their fellow comrades and identify and develop their own identity, which may not have been allowable to them before the internet. And so the ability for people to find like-minded individuals is potentially very scary to government officials who are thinking about groups collecting and organizing. So just something to look out for.
Yeah, food safety is another big one too in that area. So you should look those up. Really interesting cases. But we only have about 5 or 7 minutes left. We want to take as many questions as we can. So over here, yes. Why don't we just take about 3 or 4 and then we'll kind of bunch them up if we can. Yeah, right there.
The kind of technocratic corporate elite, the Jack Ma's and Jack Ma Juniors, are they becoming kind of a politically influential, sensitive issue that have some kind of influence because of the amount of capital and influence they have, especially when companies like Tencent are expanding beyond China's borders and buying startups in San Francisco and becoming global forces?
Right, that's a good point. So let's go around. So technocratic corporate elite like Jack Ma, tycoons and wealth. Yes, good.
Anybody else?
So we're just going to go around and get some. Yep.
I'm wondering, and I think you might have addressed it, are some of the apps that are being developed by startups coming over here? And also, do you think anybody in China is watching us here?
I'm sure they are.
My phone is reporting everything back to the Communist Party. You saw that?
Jeremy's a Chinese celebrity, actually.
Yeah.
For you, those who've been censored, what's your freedom now to go back and forth to China and to blog, post, talk about it?
Yeah, it's a good point.
One more in the back here. This young lady took a selfie with him because she was so excited to meet him.
My question is about your point on internet commentary not always representative. So I know that there are a lot of articles in the U.S. media that just, collate a bunch of tweets from Weibo and say that's what the Chinese think. So I was wondering if there are media companies in the U.S. or consulting firms that actually try to analyze, in a big data sort of way, the content of what's on Weibo, Weixin, stuff like that.
Is that what your company does, or not kind of?
Sort of. I mean, there are in the U.S. big data. We don't do big data. There's a company called Crimson Hexagon, which analyzes Weibo. You can't analyze WeChat because what I mentioned, you can't go viral. It's closed. You can't get the tweets, basically.
So even the public-facing version of it?
That's the only part that's accessible, and that's not usually individuals, so it's not really social media.
Just to plug my future research.
Yeah, please. Okay, yeah. Then please explain.
That's exactly what I've been studying for the past 6 months. These public-facing accounts, and it's like Jeremy said, it's very difficult for them to go viral, but they do in growing numbers. They're starting to have hundreds of thousands of followers. Some of them are getting close to 1 million. And when you think about having 1 million people reading your material, that's as big as some local newspapers. So in China. So. Looking at these tweets, I have been able to see, or these public-facing accounts on Weixin, I've started to see similar types of censorship, and hopefully, as we go forward, thinking about how they're going to be managed as they start reaching larger audiences is an important question.
Right. Good point. Any other questions? And otherwise, we'll address some of these things. One more.
Yeah. I wonder if any of you are able to tell us a little bit about social media use among children in China, at what age they start to get plugged in, and what's typical in that population.
Great. We can talk about the WeChat for a second, or what apps are being developed in China are making it here. I think WeChat benefits from not sounding Chinese. So WeChat, Line, if you didn't know much about them, you wouldn't know that they're originated in Asia, and I think WeChat actually has been actively trying to make their platform accessible.
They have, but I think they're focusing wisely on emerging markets because, I mean, if WeChat gets traction here, Facebook's PR team will immediately start talking about how all your tweets are going to the, Beijing, and I don't think that's going to fly in the US somehow. It's a big dream of Chinese tech companies to make it abroad. None of them have had any success. They've just done acquisitions. And one of the problems with the Great Firewall is that it removes foreign competition. They're not used to dealing with, the landscape in America and Europe.
That's a great point. So they're not used to dealing with a virgin landscape where they don't put their thumb on the scale, right? That's a good point. Tycoons, Jack Ma, technocratic elite. Any comments on how the Chinese citizens view these multi-billionaires and their role in society?
No. Other way around, the Communist Party is co-opting them. Robin Lee, the head of Baidu, went to Brazil with Xi Jinping. They were at meetings together. Xi Jinping helped launch Baidu's Brazil search engine. One of Xi Jinping's early stops after he became president was to the headquarters of Tencent. And the message is pretty clear. You behave yourselves. Yeah. You've got some nice windows up front there. It's basically, you got to behave or we'll shut you down. You can make money, just be nice, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other things? We're talking about internet commentary and research. I mean, I always thought that would be a great business model for someone to be like the storyful of Chinese content, to kind of feed translated significant themes out of the Chinese internet to foreign or Western organizations.
Right. Yeah, there are a number of really fascinating blogs. Which, to plug Jeremy's Danwei site, if you go to his model workers.
Let me put that page on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We became capitalists and stopped publishing interesting things, but this URL here has a list of blogs and websites about China that, if you're interested in the internet and media, you'll find useful.
Yeah, in fact, this is, in general, what we recommend as the follow-up to, if you want to learn more. So there's a great podcast that Jeremy's on a regular basis called Sinica Podcast. Kaiser is one of the top folks at Baidu. He's a Chinese-American guy, but they talk about all things social media and pop culture and Chineseness. The Meeker Report, everyone here knows about the Mary Meeker Report. 15 pages, really pretty good dissection of what's happened or some interesting case studies. There's an annual Chinese Internet Research Conference that both Jason and I have been involved with in the years. That's much more academic, but if you want to kind of see the cutting edge stuff, like what Jason's working on, Chinese Internet Research Conference, Google that, you'll find some really cool things there. And then Danwei's list of China websites and blogs to watch. And this is really good because these are useful to folks who don't speak Chinese and don't read Chinese. So it's a really nice list from there. Okay. Any other questions that we can answer otherwise? Censorship. Oh, censorship and children.
Well, my website was blocked in 2009, and it destroyed my, so-called career because it was my business, and I was trying to be a media platform based on advertising, and so I had to, kind of pivot is the word I suppose they use to research, which is what we do now. They blocked the website, and I got harassed when there was the Jasmine Revolution, which was a kind of an attempt by some Chinese folks in the US to organize kind of color, following the Arab Spring. And it never went anywhere at all, but it completely freaked the Communist Party out. And some cops came by to kind of plainclothes, nasty people to kind of just let me know they were there. That's the extent of it. I go back and, I've lived in China until March, and I'll see if they don't let me back in next time, but I've never had any other problems. And that's fairly typical with websites. Cut off the website, and then, if somebody doesn't persist in making trouble, then that's all they need to do.
Yeah,
but you maybe can talk more about censorship and implications and what happens.
So a lot of folks do actively track what sort of sites get onto the Great Firewall list. So for instance, greatfire.org is a fantastic resource for that sort of thing. And sometimes we look at what gets blocked by the Great Firewall and we just throw up our hands and wonder why, what's going on. Was it related to a particular incident? Was it related to some particular campaign that they've been running? And sometimes we can figure it out, and we could, and we can make a certain, suggest people come and ask us what's going on, what should we do, who do we appeal to? We could say, just maybe relax. It's near June 4th. Things will calm down in a couple of weeks. Your site might probably got caught up temporarily. It'll get, opened up again. But sometimes, sometimes it'll land on a list and it'll persist, even if after, many years after, you'll be able to still recognize, well, if we test it, your site is still blocked. And because there's very little recourse for foreign companies and foreign media organizations to,
not very little, no recourse.
Yeah.
I try.
Like if you are partnered with a local company, like what many folks have tried to do to enter into the Chinese market, you may be able to get traction with them. Like for instance, Microsoft is now, for Skype, they were partnered with a local company called Tom, and now they're partnered with one of the Play stores there called Wando. But yeah, so you can partner with organizations in China who may be able to help you navigate these sorts of straits. But yeah, like Jeremy has said, sometimes there's no recourse. It's blocked. It's blocked.
And then if you're speaking of inside China, the internet companies, as Jason mentioned, basically self-censor because otherwise they'll lose their business license. And a lot of that is done without government directive. Sometimes it is government directive. But if you persist in posting things online and you open up new accounts and you're organizing politically, you will get taken away by the nasty men.
Great. Well, thanks so much, folks, for coming.